kind of dough in terms of assets minus liabilities, you've got $1 million, right? So $1 million is a decent amount of money. $1 billion is 1,000 million. Just let that sink in for a second. 1,000 million. What's a trillion? 1,000 billion is a trillion. Now, if your mind's not getting blown at this point, then you're a heck of a lot smarter than me, which you might be. You might be able to digest that. But that's a crazy, 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 really unfathomable amount of money that we look at in this macroeconomy. And so, does it matter? Do we need to look at the overall country amount of productivity? I think the argument is yes. It's a helpful thing, but it's not the end. It's a means to the end, right? So what do we want in society? Well, I would argue we want human flourishing. I'd like to have a society where each individual has an opportunity to flourish in the best way possible for themselves. And so the amount of income that we make is part of that flourishing. It's pretty hard to flourish if you're scraping by to put food in your tummy, right? I mean, having some amount of income is important for our material needs. I think it's at the lower end. Maybe some of you have looked at, what is it, Maslow's pyramid hierarchy. You know, so fulfilling those material needs is part of the picture. And so analyzing some of these macroeconomic variables helps us maybe design policies that will hopefully give us more information, more data, so that we can make better decisions from a policy standpoint. Okay, so what does the market system do to answer these types of questions? So here's how I like to kind of characterize the market, and as we get kind of deep into maybe some different types of macroeconomic concepts, I want you to come back to the market system. What is the market system? Well, households are ultimately who we really care about. We don't care about corporations per se, right? Most of the laws aren't out there to protect corporations, but ultimately out there to protect individual property and individual rights. Part of your rights as an individual is to start your own company and then be protected, and which gives you kind of corporate protection, if you will. So it's all kind of boils down to the individual. And so here's society. We got babies and old people and young people, right? We got about 350 million is the population in the United States. This is what we're kind of shooting for, is in terms of flourishing. How do we help these people be better, be who they are maybe meant to be? All right. As a part of them trying to pursue happiness, if we go back to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they are able to, if they want, choose to sell some of their resources. Land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship are all tied back to some individual over here. Even if it's corporate ownership, people own corporations. So individuals are ultimately tied to all of the basic resources in the economy. And so these guys have the opportunity to sell those resources to businesses. Businesses, of course, are just a subset of individuals who maybe for 8 hours a day work together according to their comparative advantage from the stuff that they learned at Auto University and the skills that they've developed, and they contribute to some sort of process that ultimately makes a final good or service. So those final goods, so here's that production process that I had on the slide before, where we have the buckets of land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship magically almost being transformed into final goods and services that are there to serve these folks ultimately. Okay, well, these guys are not donating that stuff. These guys have to buy that stuff. And so they're giving them wages and rents and interest and profits and salaries and all kinds of payments for those resources in what we call the factor market. We call these resources factors of production. We call them inputs. We got lots of different words that we use. Those are kind of the three primary ones that you need to be comfortable with. So the resource market down here is this exchange of firms wanting to buy resources from households, and here's the dollar flow that goes back to the households. The households then, of course, as you guys know, run to Walmart and they spend that money on these final goods and services. And so the macroeconomy and the flows that we have in the market system can be traced through all of the individual exchanges and then aggregated up. Okay, so that is kind of a market without the government explicitly shown. And so then we have the government enter the picture. These are all on the slides, by the way, that are on my Econ Lab. All of these are on there with the PDF. The same thing, so I encourage you to maybe even print those off, and we'll tie things back to this as we move through the class. So we have the government. The government provides some goods and services. Well, where do they get the resources for that? Well, some of the resources have to be redirected. So the government has to purchase those resources from households. So not all of the resources go to private businesses. Some of them go to the government. The government has to pay for those resources. So part of the spending, government spending that goes on, is to buy resources. And then if you work for the government, if you're scrubbing toilets at the White House or something, then you're going to get paid your paycheck. Part of that paycheck is going to go back in terms of income taxes, right? So the government, through force, we talked about Tom and Jen on the island, and one of our key premises that makes capitalism as wonderful as I think it is that it's all voluntary. We know that you're made better off because you didn't have to buy it. Nobody forced you to buy that good, right? You could choose not to buy it. So therefore, you were made better off through it. The government doesn't work that way. They can force you to buy weapons of mass destruction to go blow up some stuff over in Iran. You guys are being forced to buy that, whether you like it or not, right? That's called coercion. So it's involuntary. You can't choose to not pay it. But this is a democracy, I can vote. Yeah, you can vote. But if you didn't want that level of weapons of mass destruction and you were in the minority through a majority vote, you still got to pay it, right? So it's different than private transactions. Government through force, because if you don't pay your taxes, you will go to jail. You will pay fines, eventually go into jail. They're pretty easy on you because everybody screws up. They're not going to throw you in jail right away when you didn't pay your taxes. But eventually, you might find yourself in court, and eventually find yourself in jail if you don't pay your taxes. That's our system. So the government collects those taxes in the resource market, kind of income tax, if you want to think of it that way. But there's tax on interest and profits and all of that stuff, right? And then upstairs, we have the market for final goods and services, the goods market, I like to call it. And we pay money at the cash register. So you go run to Walmart, and there's a sales tax, right? You go to buy a book, A Conflict of Visions, which runs about $20, and it's free to you if you sign up for the book club. So did you guys get the email about the book club? I only got, I think, 2 or 3 slots left. There's a maximum of 10, and I've got 2 or 3 slots left for that. So if you're interested, our first book club meeting is going to be February 4th, Tuesday with pizza. You get a free book. We're going to talk about the first 3 chapters. If you make it to all of the meetings, you get $50 in your hand, 50 cash. I like cash. So 50 cash will be handed to you if you make it through the book club and enjoy with the meetings and kind of help with our discussions. It's all going to be a lot of fun. So we have Dr. Justin Clark, our philosopher, is participating in the discussion, and then Donald Anderson, who you might know, our director of multicultural program. I don't know what his title is. His title's kind of evolved over time. He's in the book club too. So it's about one of my favorite economists. So if you guys are interested, go to that email, send me an email. It's kind of first come, first serve. There's 10 spots for the $50 deal. I think we got 2 to 3 left. So you go to that book. Let's see, I kind of lost track on my little sales pitch there. What was I saying? You're buying this book. Let's see, Walmart was sending the book over. You guys get it? What? Yeah, yeah. Oh, the sales tax. So it's 20 bucks, let's say, at Walmart, and you go to the cash register and they say that'll be $22, right? Because we have roughly a 10% sales tax here in Kansas. It varies. It actually can be as high as 13%. If you go to Overland Park at one of the Oak Park malls, there can be additional taxes added on. So usually between 9 and somewhere between 9 and 13%. So those taxes don't go to the federal government, by the way. So when I say the word government, it might be the federal government that they primarily get it through income taxes. Your sales tax is usually going to fund the state government. That's what state governments pay for a lot of their stuff. And then some stuff, local option sales taxes to city governments. So we're talking kind of all levels of government. Police here, local Ottawa police, fire department, that sort of thing. Okay, so that is kind of government's role in here. This little G3 is the spending. So G1, G2, so this was buying, spending on resources, spending on weapons of mass destruction, going to Guns R Us. And then G3 is called transfer payments, which is a large chunk of what we'll talk about in macro class. And so it's kind of what I call Robin Hood theory. Take from the rich, give to the poor. You guys heard a Robin Hood story? It goes well beyond that, though, in the United States. So it's also take from the healthy, give to the unhealthy. Take from the employed, give to the unemployed. Here's the one that usually hits you guys the hardest. Take from the young, give to the old. What do we call that program? Social Security, yeah. That's a transfer payment. There's not some big investment fund on Wall Street that's saving your guys' money. So if you look on your paychecks on what the Social Security payment is going, that money is coming in and going out basically to an old person. So it's just a transfer payment. Take from the young, give to the old. So it's usually kind of shocking for students to learn that that represents about 65% of your federal tax bill. So if you cut a check for the federal government for $100, 65 of those dollars are going towards Robin Hood spending, not weapons of mass destruction, not education and roads and bridges and internet and all kinds of stuff. It's going towards Robin Hood stuff. The government has grown into this role of, I know what to do with your money better than what you know what to do with your money. So I'm going to take your money, give it to somebody else, because you won't do it otherwise. And I know better than you of who's in need and who needs the money. That's kind of what's gone on. I know it might sound, devilish or something, but it's been a slowly evolving thing. Back prior to the Great Depression, so we go back to the 20s and the turn of the century in the 20th century, so the early 1900s, government spending of Robin Hood stuff might have been down around 20%, 15%. So what slowly happened is that the government has taken the reins and increased spending in those places. I don't want to eliminate all that spending, so I don't want you to think that. But I do want to kind of think about those things. Like, is that the right way to go? One of my kind of personal philosophies is that the nonprofit sector was basically non-existent. Nonprofit corporations were non-existent. There was churches and other things that kind of helped with the aid the poor and whatnot. But I think as we've evolved nonprofit companies, that, by the way, need to earn a profit like a regular company, but that's another story we can get into. But as we have nonprofit organizations, I think there could be more displacement of government doing that work and nonprofit agencies doing that work. So I think there's room for us to shift some of those things that we care about, the dollars to people in need, just by shifting it more into private hands, which isn't a for-profit corporation. Over here, there could be a nonprofit agency too, right? We got lots of those. You guys are familiar with the United Way and all the things, maybe you did some stuff on MLK Day or whatever. Here locally, we got the Hope House. I help the poor through an organization called Ripples of Change, where I do some personal financial coaching of people that are in need. There's just lots of different opportunities that I think might help those people more by shifting some of it from a central location in Washington, D.C. to something maybe very local. So, all right, so that's kind of a snapshot of what I call the market system, right? Kind of, it's a mixed economy, really. We don't have a free market. We do have a government. There needs to be a government. What exactly is the role of government will be some of the things we talk about in this class. Okay, questions or comments there? All right. I think I'm going to go to the board next here. I'm going to put this up. All right, so I want to think about ways we acquire money. Ways we acquire money. So kind of the sources of funds. So this is macro. Ways to get money. How do you guys get money that you can go buy stuff with? Workforce, right? So you've got productive labor, right? So productive labor. What do we mean by that? You got a job. So you're basically selling resources, selling productive resources. Your time. You could be on the couch playing video games, or you could be earning a paycheck. So that is one way you can get money. How else can you get money instead of getting a job?
Sell some stuff.
Sell some stuff, good. So we have the sale of assets. Okay, what else?
Join Russ McCullough's book club.
Join Russ McCullough's book club, yes, where you're earning your pay here, right? It's not a gift, so that would fall maybe into category number 1. So that's a good one. And I recommend everybody to do. By the way, with assets, I do want to add on, we can have real assets or financial assets. So real assets like a car or a painting or a house, we call those real assets, usually kind of touch and feel them. And then financial assets might be, stocks or bonds. So you might own shares of a corporation, or you might, a bond is simply you loaning money to a corporation, perhaps, or a government for that matter. So you can have financial assets and real assets. You can sell some stocks, you can sell your car. Those are ways you can get some money. How else do you guys get money?
Heirs.
Inheritance, yes. So number 3, a gift or a transfer. To kind of tie it into what we just talked about, a gift or a transfer. So grandma dies, gives you some money. Maybe grandma's alive and gives you some money, right? Your birthday money. And then finally, the most popular way is what a lot of you in this room are doing. How else did you get money to come to Ottawa? Loans. So borrowing. Now, if you got a Pell Grant, so you got some gifts or grants, that would fall here. Borrowing would fall here, where you got to pay back those funds. All right. Can you think of anything else? I say that this list is complete, but am I missing anything? Can you think of anything else of how you could get some money? Yeah, Carter? Huh? Welfare, good. So if you go on welfare, that's going to fall into this category. So a gift or transfer. Now that's a forced transfer, right? So somebody else is paying taxes to give it to somebody else, kind of the government getting involved in a maybe welfare, food stamps, or some other needs-based program.
Interest on investments.
Interest on investments. So interest on investments. So once we've done that, you can earn money on your financial assets, right? So you'll have some income coming in through those resources that you pledged there.
So you would say, yeah, back,
Yeah. Yep. But you're not actually selling it, but it is fall into category number 1, that you earn some interest on that resource that you put in, right? Because there's 2 different things here. Here's kind of your value of your asset versus the dividend or the interest payment that you got. Okay, so that kind of gives that. So now let's go to the more fun way, ways to spend money. Ways to spend money. You guys maybe know this one better than the other one. So number 1, what can you do with your money? What can you do with your money? What's your favorite thing to buy? Food? Food sound good? Okay, so you can buy new goods and services. So buy new goods and services. G&S, which I probably should write out since this is like the first time, but I'll use G&S quite a bit. So goods and services. So brand spanking new ones. What else can you spend your money on? Bills, clothes. Now, if you buy them from a garage sale, you're buying some used goods and services. Well, services aren't used too often, but buying used goods. So buy used goods. Existing assets. Real or financial. So if you guys go buy a share of Facebook today, Zuckerberg doesn't get any money. Who gets the money? If you go buy $5,000 of Facebook today on Wall Street, who gets the money? The broker, maybe. The other person who owned it, yeah. So Wall Street is what's called a secondary market. And so it's a market where people are exchanging assets that they already own. So it's kind of like eBay. So if you bought used stuff on eBay, basically eBay is creating a market for you to find another buyer or seller, right? Bringing a buyer and a seller together, and eBay gets a little cut of it off there when I buy stuff on eBay all the time. In fact, this book came from eBay. One of these books came from eBay. I bought some from Amazon, but some were used. So I bought some of these books were used because I'm trying to be efficient with our minimal amount of funds we have. So for this book club, I've got 20 bucks roughly wrapped up in, well, they were down as low as 15 when I found some used ones. So 15 to 20 bucks wrapped up in the book. We're going to have pizza, and I'm going to pay you 50 bucks. Start putting 10 people to that. We're spending 500 to 700 bucks on the book club minimum. Actually, we're spending closer to 1,000 with some other things that we're doing with it. So we got like that to take into account. And so when I go to eBay, I'm buying a real asset from somebody else. When I go to Wall Street and buy Facebook, I'm actually buying somebody else who wanted to sell their shares of Facebook. And it was operated through the broker. So the broker is kind of more like eBay is acting when we buy used stuff. Okay, what else can we do with our money? Buy new stuff, buy used stuff.
Donate.
Donate, yes. We can give it away. So we can gift our money or transfer it. And then what else can we do with our money? We kind of look at this list here. Save it. You can save it. And if you save it, what is the bank holding on to all of your money if you've got $10,000 in your bank?
No.
No, those of you maybe have figured out the banking system. They don't just have all the money sitting in bills in their big vault. They are giving out car loans and house loans, and they're loaning out some money, right? So what you can do with your money is lend it. Do some lending. So maybe it's a dad loan to a son. We're not going to give you it, son. You're going to have to pay us back. Maybe it'll be 0% interest, but you still have to pay us back, right? All right, so the reason why we do this, or why I like to kind of start off macro this way, is that here we are on the island. And we've got a bunch of people engaged in exchange. So this guy is selling a car to this guy over here, right? And this guy is then exchanging some money for the car. So if you're God, looking down on the island, has anything changed on the island in terms of the amount of stuff there? No, it's just changed hands, right? So it went from this person to this person, and this person might be happier now that they were willing to give $2,000 for the car. The car to them is worth $4,000, the value that they get on it. And so they're actually ahead of the game in terms of value. But in terms of looking at the island and thinking about the physical amount of goods and services and stuff that we have, nothing has fundamentally changed, right? Nothing's fundamentally changed. And so when we look at the macroeconomy, what somebody loaned is what somebody borrowed. So this doesn't create anything new on the island when we think about borrowing and lending in terms of that activity. Same thing is true if the dad gave the car to the son, nothing new was created. And so the gift and transfer, all of the volume of exchanges that go on in terms of charitable giving or gifts going between people, wash out in terms of this picture of the macroeconomy on did anything new happen or anything good happen. And then buying used goods and services and selling used goods and services, those two just kind of wash out, not creating anything in particular in terms of the island. So here's where the transformation takes place, is that in the macroeconomy, all of our income equals the spending that we do on new goods and services. All of our income equals the spending that we do on new goods and services. At the individual level, are you guys able to spend more than you make in terms of income? At the individual level, are you guys able to spend more money than what you're actually making in terms of income? Yeah, most of you are doing it, right? So if you're paying tuition here and you're making $10,000 a year, I know that you are doing that, right? Because our tuition is a lot more than $10,000 a year. So at the individual level, you're able to borrow more than you make, which means you're able to spend more than you make, because you can combine your labor with your part-time job plus some student loans, and you're able to spend, let's say, $40,000 this year and only make $10,000 by going $30,000 in debt. Maybe you got a grant. Maybe you got $10,000 of a grant and a $20,000 student loan, right? So some combination of gift, borrowing, and a part-time job allows you to spend more than what you're actually earning. But from the nation's standpoint, not possible. From the nation's standpoint, from the country's standpoint, that's not possible. All of our income for the nation must equal the spending on new goods and services because of this way these things wash out in the end. Yeah, question?
So this is kind of like a little unrelated, but what makes the government decide to print more money in that sense? Like, what motivates them to print more money?
I'll just make a short comment because we're going to spend a whole chapter on that. But the motivation is they're not charging. The politicians are too weak to raise enough money to pay for their spending. And so then they have two choices. They can borrow it, which our government does a hell of a lot of, and or print money. Because they run the printing press. The government can just go to the old machine. This is kind of the convenience of being the government that can force things. They're like, oh, we don't have enough money for weapons of mass destruction, and we really need to kill some Iranians today. What should we do? Well, we could raise taxes to pay for that next bomb, or, oh, I got an idea. Hey, we got some money. Let's go to Guns R Us and buy some more bombs, right? So they have the power to print money. Now, what I'm going to pause on is that has implications. When the government just prints off money and goes and buys stuff, that's not going to help economic activity the way some people think that it might. And it's ultimately going to cause some big time problems that we see going on around the globe in different ways due to the fact that they can go and make the money and go buy stuff, right? Okay, any other questions or comments there? Okay, so from the picture, I'm not going to drop the screen again, but from our picture here, in fact, I'm going to go back to the free market one that's a little cleaner just to kind of see it. The money that we spend on final goods and services, spending on final goods and services equals the income. These things have to work out. So when we talk about economic activity for the nation, one of the variables we're going to look at is gross domestic product. And there's two ways we're going to explore on how we can measure that gross domestic product. Okay, the expenditure approach and the income approach. So, gross domestic product, GDP, probably our key variable that is used to measure the prosperity of the country. Have you heard of the ups and downs of the economy? What do we call when the economy is going down? The economy's bad. What? Recession. Good. So when the economy is going into recession, something's going down. So we got the ups and downs of the economy. It goes up, it goes down, who knows, maybe it's going to do that, looks like that, maybe. And so over time, the economy goes through ups and downs. So the down period is a recession, and what's declining is GDP. So GDP is gross domestic product. GDP, and it is, by definition, the dollar value of all final goods and services produced within a nation's boundaries over some, I'm not going to take up space up there, I know I'm getting low here, but I'll repeat it, over some time period, usually a year. So gross domestic product is the dollar value of all final goods and services produced within a nation's boundaries over some time period. So those of you who are new to the class, my recommendation is whatever I write on the board, you write on your notes. That's kind of the thing to do. So you guys back here, make sure, some of you might be new to class, my cell phone policy is to make sure it is in your pocket, tucked away. I don't allow cell phones on the desk. So not sitting on your chair. If you pull it out and check it, if your phone rings, you're going to lose a point. If mine goes off, which it inevitably does, everybody who's present gets a point. So that's kind of how my cell phone policy works. We're all going to forget at different times, so don't be too rocked, but it might cost you some points. Okay, so gross domestic product is that, the dollar value of all final goods and services produced within the nation's boundaries over the course of the year. So why is that important? It's equal to our income. So we might say, oh, who cares about how much stuff we made? Well, once we start to get it as our income, it kind of takes on some new meaning. So in the United States, if you take our $20 trillion divided by our 350 million people roughly, we end up getting about 63 grand per person. Pretty nice income. So on average, our per capita GDP, our GDP per person or income per person in the United States is about $63,000. And so now that allows us to kind of look around the globe at other countries maybe and to say, well, how much money did they make in Japan? How much money did they make in India? How much money did they make in Norway? How much did they make in Africa? Right? In different countries there. So we can use GDP as a statistic to think about income. Now, what gets kind of crazy is you might say, wow, they're making $14,000 in China, but everything's cheap in China. They got cheap labor, right? And so 14,000 probably gets you more stuff in China than 63,000 gets you in the United States, especially if you're shopping on Rodeo Drive or something, right? Economists have answers to that we'll kind of get into as we go through the semester. Something called purchasing power parity. That'll look at exchange rates and the amount of purchases you can make. When economists do it, we're talking about 63,000, let's say these water bottles are $1 a piece. We're talking, we've converted it to 63,000 water bottles. So in that country where they're making 14,000, they can buy 14,000 water bottles. See what I'm saying? In terms of the real stuff they can buy, that's all been kind of equated. So these are material differences across countries. When we say 14,000 per person versus 63,000 per person, we're talking about the amount of actual stuff being consumed, not just money in one place or the other. And well, rice is way cheaper in China than it is in the United States. All of that's been kind of calculated through some macroeconomic techniques.
When you say that average person makes $60,000 a year, is that including ways of making money, like the borrowed money that they receive and things like that? Is all of that kind of incorporated into?
Yeah, so all of the income includes wages, rents, interest. So all forms of income are included in that 20 trillion, the income that we have. And then we're simply just dividing by the population. So of course we know every person's not making 63,000, right? But then that always starts to beg the question of, well, what about, why don't we just take some from the rich, give to the poor, and you know, the poor people should have at least 40,000 if the average person has 63, and certainly nobody should be making more than 120. That would be crazy. So let's just tax 100%. Anybody who's making more than 120,000, let's just tax them at 100%. Is 100% a good tax rate? I mean, don't you think 120,000 is a decent pay? Would you guys like to be making 120,000? You know, some of you would be like, you know, a $40,000 job as a new OU graduate, it's a pretty good starting job. 50, I'd like to see more of you. If you were econ majors, you'll be more closer to 50, by the way. So 50 would be even better. But one of the best, double major in accounting and econ to get you, I've had a couple different graduates get up to like 55. First job, starting out of Ottawa University. So if you want to talk about economics, if you care about money and stuff, come and see me. Maybe you need to be an econ major, right? So, but 40 is pretty good too, but certainly 120 is a decent amount of money. So what's wrong with taxing people? Oh, that 100's way too high, right? 90%? Would that be okay? How about 70%? How about, we'll tax them, and of course they get to keep the 120, but basically every dollar that they earn above 120 would be taxed at 70%. So they earn $100, they get to keep 30, government gets 70, so that we can go give it to poor people. Good idea? Do you think we'd ever have a 70% tax rate in the United States? What do you think our highest rate is?
40%.
40? That's a real good guess. That is our high, 39.5 is our highest marginal tax rate at the federal level. So if you throw state tax on top of that, it's actually going to get you people who are really high income earners, that's going to get you higher than 39. So the federal income tax. Would we ever have 70 in the United States? We had it.
Had it one point.
We had it, yeah. So believe it or not, in the good old US of A, back in the 70s and 60s, we had tax rates at that level. And so one of the major reforms that happened after the economy was kind of in the crapper that we'll talk about more in the 70s due to a large number of reasons. The era of Ronald Reagan put forth some of the major tax cuts that got us back to these 30s. Now, economists have studied this. It turns out, like, even when we had 70% tax rates, there was a lot of other loopholes that they weren't always paying 70%, long story short. But nonetheless, the law of the land was 70%. So, why is 70%, you think, too high? Why would that possibly not be good? Because I think you talk to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders, 70% would definitely be on the table. Why do you think 70% might be too high? Yeah. Yeah, keeping people from working, right? So it's like, well, if the government's taking $70 out of, the amount I earn, the beach sounds good. Cancun sounds great, right? So where's the incentive to work, right? And so I think, in short, somewhere in the 30, all of my analysis over the years, somewhere under 50 for sure, to me, and this is strict opinion, is probably the better spot to be to not have people too disincentivized to work, right? We want the successful people that are going and earning a lot of money. Why are they earning a lot of money? I'm going to throw that out to you, let it hang a little bit. Why are high income earners making a lot of money? For the most part. Why do high income earners actually make a lot? What have they done? Taylor, right?
Yeah.
Higher education, college, so they might have done that. But how about I'm talking kind of the real high income earners, somebody making, let's say 500 grand a year. Now we got professional athletes. I'm happy to go talk about professional athletes too, but let's not talk about professional athletes right now. So somebody's making $250,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year. Why?
They're reinvesting their money.
They're reinvesting their money, perhaps. But what if that's their actual paycheck? So you guys know some surgeons? Everybody knows a doctor, right?
It's a niche, like specialized.
Specialized thing in a market system. If somebody's making $500,000, what's true about the people paying $500,000? That's what their service is, right? So there's somebody voluntarily paying for their product. Now let's think about Facebook, entrepreneurs, apps. Can somebody be making $500,000 selling a $1 product or a $2.99 product? Of course, they do it all the time. All your little games that you're downloading or whatever, you hit it big with the next greatest game, and you could be making $500,000 a year selling a $3 product, right? What are you doing? You're serving these folks. You're serving them. You're a waitress or a waiter. You served them. They voluntarily paid you the $3 or $4 because to them, they would have paid $10 for that stupid little game, right? So they're profiting off you. We're back to Tom and Jen on the island. There's a win-win exchange. So that's not true if the business or the person is in cozy with the government and they've passed laws to get that high income because they've restricted competition somehow. That's another topic we're going to get to later on in the term. But for now, I kind of want to get you thinking about the market system and how pay and income kind of fit together with spending and all of that.
So we talked about earlier with AOC and Liz Warren, I imagine, about the marginal tax. So if people make over $10 million a year, how would that disincentivize normal people at work when the people don't make?
Oh, I'm not worried about the regular people facing the lower end tax. I'm worried about the person making 10 mil.
Yeah.
I don't want them to stop making 10 mil.
Well,
can they go to the island a few times? Can they actually live solid in a beautiful rest? If you made $10 million this year, maybe you guys don't know this. You know, I go to Cancun all the time for vacation. Stay in a palatial type looking place. You can do that, a couple, you and your spouse, for as little as, I mean, it varies, but let's say $3,000 to $5,000 per week. 52 weeks in a year. 52 weeks in a year times 5,000. Maybe I should put the 5,000 here. How much money are we talking here? 50. Let's pretend it's 50 weeks. We cross out the 0, right? What do? We got a 0 down there. Then we do this 0, 0. Maybe another 0. 5 times 5 is 25. You just made $10 freaking million. Can you afford to be catered for 52 weeks this year down in the palatial place down on the islands? Hell yeah, it's easy. So what I'd rather have is that person who made 10 million, assuming that they made it through voluntary market transaction, I'd like them to make 20 million. Rather than take time off to be at the beach. If they're good at what they do, and they can develop another $3 app or something that makes us happier or whatever they did, let's keep them doing that. Why? Do they have people that work for their company? Yes. Those people are getting paychecks. Those people run to Walmart and buy toilet paper. Walmart pays their employees that money, right? So the more innovation, the more technology, the new things that we have that are served up end up working their way into our system. Their income, however they choose to spend it, and many of them will choose to reinvest that income, by the way, too. So they're reinvesting, they're coming up with new things, they're maybe taking risks that if you don't have the comfort level of a high income or a high amount of wealth, you might not have taken that shot, like, oh, this is kind of risky. You guys watch Shark Tank? Do you think they make money on every deal they do? Heck no. Some of those fail, right? But the entrepreneurship is kind of turning over things. They're pretty careful with their money. They try to make sure they're putting their money in the right place. But if they weren't worth $10 million, they wouldn't throw $500,000 at the new person who's in the Shark Tank, right? They're willing to take that risk. Now, they want a return on that, too. Usually, their rates of return are not the bank rates of return. They're not getting 8% or expecting to get 10%. They're expecting probably a 30% return on their money or 20% return on their money because they're taking a decent amount of risk. Some of those deals are going to flop. Some of those deals are going to make 30%. Some of those deals are going to hit it big, and they're going to make 100% on their money, right? Depending on how much they hit it. But that's a whole risk factor where it makes it a little easier to do that if you've got some funds behind it.
So if you think of the 50s, 60s, and 70s when there was 70% marginal tax rate that didn't work, or there was disincentive?
There was a disincentive, yeah. Yep, and that's part of what contributed to decline. So if we think about this ups and downs of GDP, so when GDP goes down for 2 quarters, how long is 2 quarters? A quarter is how many? Let's see, 4 means 4. 3 months, 4 months. The quarter would be, it'd be 6 months. So a quarter is 3 months out of a year. We got 12 months in a year, right? Let's see, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. So that's 12. Divided by 4 for quarters gives you 3 months to a quarter. So if the economy goes down for 2 quarters, which would be 6 months, then that is called a recession. A 2-quarter decline in GDP is a recession. And then we have these ups in the economy, which are called an expansion. So these are the 4 phases of the business cycle. Expansion and recession are 2 of them. And then, of course, they bottom out somewhere. The bottom is called a trough. and the tippy top, real clever here, is called a peak. So the 4 phases of the business cycle are trough, expansion, peak, recession, and then it's always these ups and downs. So we're just kind of identifying. Now, can economists predict where the peak is? Do people on Wall Street do a pretty good job of predicting the peak? Do they do a good job of predicting the trough? The answer is no. We kind of suck at it, actually. Economists are paid 6 figures, and basically nobody does a good job of predicting the turns of the market. The best people on Wall Street will usually do it a few years in a row, and then they won't beat the market. They won't beat the general market on average. So that's true. Now, Wall Street's different than the economy. Remember, we're talking the general economy here. Sometimes we call it Main Street or whatever, but really it's Main Street and Wall Street combined together. It's all final goods and services. We see these ups and downs, but the stock market has these ups and downs as well. And nobody's really good at picking the peak or the troughs, the turning points. So on average, we get this growth rate. So you can kind of think of this as long-term growth rate, which is just the statistical average of GDP growing over time. So from one year to the next. And for the United States, we've pretty much been in the 2 to 3% range over the long haul. So the economy keeps growing. Incomes for the nation keep growing, roughly in this 2 to 3% range. And they vary, they go through ups and downs, as we're saying here, in the short run. But that's kind of the long-term trend, if you will. Okay, so I say that because that's where you can start to analyze, like, what was happening in the 70s, what was the trend versus the 90s, and so you can kind of pick these time frames to kind of see the impacts. That's part of the types of analysis that macroeconomists do. Okay? All right. So, how do we get this GDP? We got 2 different ways of calculating gross domestic product. So for our class, we use income and spending interchangeably. So when I say GDP, so you can think of GDP here as spending, dollar value of all, how much final goods and services. You can also think of the income of the nation. So income, spending, so we'll use the notation Y for income and GDP, but basically income and GDP, we're going to think one and the same. There's a couple little differences that you'll see in your book, and I'll talk a little bit about them today or Friday on some little nuances about how the calculation is different. But think about those 2 things as we progress through the course as one and the same. Income and spending are the same. So with that said, we have 2 ways to measure GDP. 2 ways to measure GDP. Number 1 is called the expenditure approach. So it's really the spending approach. A little bit fancier word, the expenditure approach. And what the expenditure approach does is it categorizes spending on final goods and services into 4 areas. The first area is consumption. Consumption. Consumption is spending by households on final goods and services. Spending by households on final goods and services, and it's approximately 70% of GDP. So unfortunately, this one tends to get the most press, that, oh, we just got to spend money and that'll help gross domestic product, that'll help income. But that turns out to be pretty short-sighted. But the reason is that it does represent a large chunk of gross domestic product, about 70%. Okay, our next category is investment. Now, this investment is not stocks and bonds. Remember, stocks and bonds are a secondary market for the most part of people buying used goods like you do on eBay. So when economists talk about investment, we're talking about purchases of new equipment, purchases of capital. What's capital in an econ class? New equipment, machines, buildings, stuff that helps make other stuff, right? Man-made stuff that helps make other stuff. So purchases of capital, new equipment, machines, and buildings, and inventory. So an intermediate good, if you're Walmart and you're just buying a good from a supplier and putting it on the shelf, that is one of these purchases as well. So purchases of capital and inventory by businesses. It also includes, this is kind of a special ringer here, so plus brand new homes bought by households. Plus brand new homes, new construction, brand new construction homes. Since that's such a large ticket item, if you go build a brand new house and it's a $250,000 house, we're putting it in here rather than included it with beer and chicken wings up here, right? So we're going to kind of categorize it a little bit differently. So plus brand new construction homes by households. So they're by households that are buying that. All right, so that's our I. Questions on that one at all? Or on either one of these two? I guess I didn't ask on the first one. Investment makes up about 20% of GDP. So this one's about 20%, this one was about 70%. Our next category is government spending. So G, government spending, pretty self-explanatory. It's just the government money that's being spent. So purchases by government. And then our last category is net exports. So now we're going to bring in the rest of the world. I like to just use the abbreviation X for net exports. So whenever you see that net word, what usually happens? So if we think about your net income as opposed to your gross income, what's usually been done with your net income? Taxes have been taken out, right? So it's like, usually when you see the net word, whatever follows, something's been subtracted from it, right? So in this case, net exports is the dollar value of exports minus imports. So net exports equals exports minus imports. Now, since we just had our international chapter, is this a positive sign or a negative sign for the United States typically? Positive or negative? Exports, what is that again? Stuff we sell to the rest of the world or buy from the rest of the world? Sell minus what we buy from the rest of the world. So in the United States, what's true about net exports? Which one's bigger, our imports or our exports? Imports, right? So we have a trade deficit, is what part of what Trump was talking about. One of the maybe many points that I might disagree with him on, but that's a big deal. So is a trade deficit a problem? I think the answer is definitely no. I think most economists would agree with me. So why do we worry about a trade deficit? Well, I think, it's hard to maybe advertise the full story. So I think what Trump's talked about is the unfair stuff that China's been doing with intellectual property and some of the deals. So free trade turns out to not be really too free. When we have a free trade agreement, how long should these documents be? What do you think? If we were I agree, Mexico, that you and I are going to trade freely with each other, right? So how long would a document like that take to write, even with legalese language? What do you think? 3 pages? 6 pages? No, but I mean, if you were just doing free trade, like if you just agreed that you can sell whatever the hell you want to me and I can sell whatever the hell you want to you.
Yeah.
How much paper would that take up to write up a truly free trade agreement?
Not a lot.
Not a lot! That's the point. The real document is 3,000 pages long. How many times can you repeat the word free trade, free trade, free trade, free trade, free trade? 3,000 pages. So it's not free trade. It comes with all these strings attached and little side deals for agriculture or technology or this producer or that producer, and all of a sudden it becomes super complex, and it's no longer really what economists might call free trade. And so I think part of what Trump was trying to do was to say, hey, we've been getting the raw end of the stick. You haven't been always following what would normally be considered free trade, where we agree to respect each other's property and not steal it from each other, for example, right? And so then that's where kind of this whole thing kind of blew up. So trade deficits in and of themselves are not a big deal. It's not a big deal for us to be importing more from another country than what we sell to them, because we're still making 63 grand a year. Why is that? Because we can buy cheap stuff from other places around the world and have our people make a lot of American products in other ways that we still consume. I mean, let's face it, most of the world is consuming stuff that came out of Silicon Valley. Would you agree? I mean, pick up any laptop, any piece of equipment, and it's got probably Silicon Valley stamped on it. Silicon Valley, the last time I checked, is in California, in the United States. So when the United States, when Americans go and spend a crap ton of money on the final goods and services of technology, why are they able to do that? Because we have more people working in places like Silicon Valley than in other places where we can just buy it cheaper, right? So it's okay to have a lot of domestically produced goods that are very valuable that Americans are already buying. That's just falling right into the other categories of consumption, not into this category. So this can be negative for a long period of time, and that's no big deal once you understand the economics of it. But most people don't, because they haven't had a class like this that you guys are having. You guys are a rare breed. Did you know that not everybody at Ottawa University even has to have an economics class? I'm trying to change that slowly but surely. And I think everybody at Ottawa University should have an economics class. Preferably microeconomics, but macroeconomics, I would prefer both. But I mean, you just kind of learn how the world works, or at least get a taste of it. Okay, so these categories now, these guys are spending about anywhere from 15 to 20. It's gone as high as 25%, by the way. It's probably fair for me to put 25%. I'm just kind of giving you some rough averages here. So 70 plus 20 is 90 plus 15 would be 105. And that's this negative part, right? So the negative part's going to kind of bring us back depending on where that. So this might be negative 5% to, you know, maybe as high as negative 15% is our trade deficit. So that's kind of what the United States looks like in terms of these four categories for gross domestic product. Okay, questions or comments so far? All right, so just had an idea. I'm going to try this a little differently than I've ever done it before. That's what I love about teaching. I'm trying to think different ways over the last 25 years. I think this is good. Okay, so GDP, I got to leave myself enough room now, is equal to the price of chicken wings times the quantity of chicken wings plus the price of beer times the quantity of beer plus ... the price of all consumption goods versus and the quantity of all consumption goods. That's this category here. So I started you off with beer and chicken wings because those would fall into the consumption category. And so GDP is going to be equal to that plus, let me go to a different color, plus the, this is where it's going to fall short here a little bit, the price of, I don't know, a computer for a business times the quantity of computers. I got too many C's going on. GDP, computer, plus the price of a new building times the quantity of the number of buildings we bought, plus all of the investment goods that the economy made. So that's this investment category. Imagine just summing up the dollar value of all the stuff that businesses bought to run their business. Woo! Okay, plus, go to green, plus the price of weapons of mass destruction, WMD, times the quantity of weapons of mass destruction, plus the price of toilet paper for Donald Trump's bathroom, times the quantity of toilet paper for Donald Trump's bathroom at the White House, plus the price of all the other government goods times the quantity of the government goods. And then finally, plus the price of, let's see, chopsticks times quantity of chopsticks. Little known fact here, you know, there's this kind of whole tariff, little trade war type of thing going on with China. But most people don't understand that one of our exports to China is chopsticks. They buy their eating utensils from us. So we got that going for us, right? So they couldn't even eat if we didn't sell them chopsticks. So we've got that as a potential threat, you know, when it comes down to bargaining. So it's true. We are an exporter of chopsticks to China. Okay, that's kind of a little funny aside. Hopefully I don't hear a lot of laughter, so I will move on. So plus quantity of Silicon Valley, you know, computer chips times the quantity of Silicon Valley stuff. And then we're going to, of course, minus the price of plastic Chinese toys, let's call it CT, times the quantity of Chinese toys that we buy, plus the price of Guinness beer times the quantity of Guinness beer, ... Good enough. There's $20 trillion worth of stuff. Amazing. All right, so if we think about all the consumption stuff, we could express it as the sum of all consumption goods from I equal 1 to n. So in math class, remember using this maybe a little bit? Way back when, maybe you forgot, but that little summation sign, the little sigma. So the sum of all the crap we bought, beer, chicken wings, haircuts, lawyer services, dental services, braces, you know, all the kit and caboodle, is the sum of all consumption goods plus the sum of all investment goods of I equals 1 to n. We'll just call I, plus the sum of all the stuff government bought, plus, I'm just going to combine these together, the sum of all exports minus imports, which I'm just going to call X, net exports of I equal 1 to n. So, when it all boils down, all of this big mess, macroeconomics turns out to be all about cigarettes. GDP equals C plus I plus G plus X, cigarettes. You need to memorize this formula. Sig X, cigarettes. GDP equals C plus I plus G plus X. And now you know where that simple expression, because you're going to see that as you work through this chapter and even future chapters. We're going to come back even in the last week of class. The last week of class, we'll actually talk about G quite a bit, of government spending. So, but this is kind of the backbone to calculating all of this economic activity. And one way to measure, I started this whole thing off with the expenditure approach. The expenditure approach is to simply add up all of our spending from these four categories. Okay, questions on that? All right. So our other way to do this is to add up our income. So let's take a look at what we're building up here. So we sold a bunch of stuff, we get the wages, rents, that's our income. We take our income and we spend it on goods and services and it comes back. So in the bigger picture, we can think about it this way. So you recognize this, I got the three economic agents, we sometimes call them. Households, government, businesses. And so with the market system, these guys can go buy beer and chicken wings, consumption. This one's a little fatter because what percent does it make up again? 70%. So 70% of GDP, 70% is being spent by households in the final goods market is coming over here for consumption goods. So there's a lot of businesses that are selling consumption type goods, right? And then investment is businesses running to the store to another company to buy a computer, to buy a machine, to buy a building, right? To buy those equipment. That is primarily our investment category. So the flow goes into the goods market and back. The government buying weapons of mass destruction, hopefully mostly from an American company, Guns R Us, they go to the marketplace and contract with a private company and spend some money there. And then we've got the rest of the world up there. That's kind of a loose outline or a shaded outline of China, but I call those other countries ROW, rest of the world. So just think of ROW being all other countries outside of our island. Those countries have this going on also, though, remember. They have all this complication going on in their system. If it's communist China, the G part is a little bit bigger, right? They're controlling the oil, they're controlling the airlines, they're controlling the manufacturing of automobiles or whatever. So there's smaller amounts coming from private individuals and bigger amounts coming from government. But they all have this type of thing going on in one way, shape, or form. So this is generalizable to any country around the world. Even the most communist of communist countries like North Korea or Cuba or something, they still have some amount of private transactions going on. There's no government out there, there's no country out there that is pure communism, so to speak, where we just kind of float along day by day and we do what we are. We all got to chip in and kumbaya by the fire and go to work, and hopefully we don't get a paycheck, but we get food and we get housing, and it doesn't work that way, right? So there's always a mixture of some sort of private transactions and public transactions, if you will, the government. So what size is the government role? All countries around the world have some degree of this going on. Some countries could be more closed off, so they're not doing very much imports and exports, right? They pretty much are self-contained. But that is unlikely too in today's global markets. They're going to be doing some degree of imports and exports. So Americans import, they're spending some money on Chinese products, and the Chinese are exporting some of their products, which is our imports, right? So what they sell to us is what we bought from them. And so if an American company is selling some stuff, the chopsticks, then we've got an export from our company. So there's your cigarettes with our graph. C plus I plus G plus X is all kind of accounted for here in the marketplace, flowing through the goods market in one way, shape, or form. From that money, we get income. And so our income minus taxes ends up being the money we can spend on that stuff. And then we're going to complicate this even further when we bring in financial markets. This is our kind of our first baby step of thinking about the economy this way. Okay, questions or comments there? So we can also do the income approach. Let's just add up everybody's wages, rents, and salaries, and interest, and all of that. And that can be another way that we calculate GDP. So that is called the income approach. All right, so expenditure approach, there we go, income approach. So number 2 is the income approach. Basically, the income approach is to sum up all income of citizens for a country. Citizens isn't even the right word, because even illegals pay taxes. You guys might not know that, some of you. So people who are here illegally can contribute federal taxes, and they file a tax return. You might say, why are they still here? Well, because they want to be here and they're doing productive work, and it's pretty honorable of them to actually contribute to the federal tax base while they're here. So that does happen. So you don't even have to be a citizen to be included in this, this income approach. All right, so this is kind of the boring accounting thing that we're not going to do too much, but we just kind of have to knock it out. So here's our formula: net domestic income. So we have gross domestic income, net domestic income. Net domestic income equals compensation to employees. You know, this is basically wages and salaries. This is a large part of the whole thing. Plus net interest payments. Net interest earned. So on your money, you earn some interest. You loan some money out. Somebody paid you some interest. Plus rent income. So money to rent out your place, your landlord, the money that they're getting. Plus corporate profits. Corporate profits. Plus proprietor's income. The sole proprietorship, this is like a small business. Proprietor's income. Think small business. Corporate profit, of course, think big business. So we got wages of employees, interest earned from investments, rent income, corporate profits, small business income. We add all those up and we get net domestic income. Now, if we take net domestic income and we do a couple maneuvers with it, we're going to subtract off indirect business taxes. And depreciation. Depreciation is kind of a tax thing that it's not really money that you spent. It's money that allows you to reduce your taxes. We do a couple maneuvers like that, and it equals GDP. That's all I was trying to get to, was adding up all the money that people make, and then there's a couple little accounting maneuvers and GDP. But like I said, for this class, we're basically saying what people make is what people have spent on final goods and services. But there is a little bit of accounting that's done with it. All right, good. Glad to get that accounting stuff out of there. So GDP has some issues. So GDP is kind of one of our primary measures of prosperity. So GDP is a primary measure of prosperity. Prosperity for a nation, for a country. But it's far from perfect in terms of measuring prosperity and economic activity, for that matter. So now that I've introduced this topic to you, it's like all the stuff we buy at Walmart, you know, restaurant, going out to eat, all that stuff, all the stuff that I've explained of cigarettes. That is what GDP for the United States ends up being about $20 trillion. We add up all that, divide it by the population, we could come up with that $63,000 per person. Great, there's a statistic. But now that you know how this thing's created, what are some things that are missing in terms of measuring prosperity or whatever, or economic activity in general?
Income inequality.
Income inequality. So it is just adding up the income. So if all of the 20 trillion is Bill Gates and everybody else has $1 worth of income, it's not showing that, right? So it is not showing the income distribution. So note on what's missing. So number one, income distribution. Let's put parentheses, income inequality. So we have some other statistical measures that we use, some of which have their own flaws, but to try to measure the distribution of income inequality. All right, what else is missing? What else is missing in terms of missing economic activity? It's missing some of the things we do as real human beings. Like, think about yourself at your house growing up, wherever that was, house or apartment, whatever you lived in. Did you guys do any work that's missing off of GDP? Give me an example of one.
Being paid cash for.
Okay, being paid cash for something, that might have been missing. So that brings me to another topic I'll come back to, Daniel, called illegal markets, right? So being paid cash. But what other work did you do at home growing up that didn't get included on the book?
Chores.
Chores! Is it work to wash the dishes, load the dishes, and unload the dishwasher? Could you have paid somebody to do that?
Yes.
Yes. If you would have hired Mary maids to come and wash your dishes, would it have showed up on GDP?
Yes.
Yes. But if you did it yourself, no. So now, I just brought up the stinking dishes. What else do you do at your house that could be hired out? Vacuum, laundry, mowing the lawn, shoveling. God bless America, you can pretty much hire anything out. Am I right? Somebody might say, God curse America. So much stuff you can buy.
Some things exchange in like a cryptocurrency. Most cryptocurrencies run in that sense.
Yeah, so, and again, so that would be potentially in illegal markets. If it's not recognized by the government, if you're transacting, you're supposed to be using, government money. That's a whole other fun story that we'll talk about when we get to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, right? So paying cash or paying other things. So, so number 2 is a big one. What I would call non-market work. Very important stuff, like, how about watching your kids? Staying home to care for kids. What was a positive thing? GDP going up or down? Up. So if you stay at home to watch your kids, GDP's not going up as much as it could be, so you're doing a bad thing. Is it bad to stay home with your kids? You should be, it would be better to send them off to daycare and pay that person so that it gets reflected in GDP. I don't think so. Not always, of course. I mean, if you're addicted to crack cocaine or something, or heroin, and you're pretty much drugged out, your kid, has to look at you with drool and spaced out, send the kid to daycare. Probably be a better deal, right? So, not in every case, but for most, I think, healthy, whatever, parents, I'd probably like to see more parents staying home with, or one parent staying home rather than less. My personal opinion is I think society would be a better place if we had more of that, compared to what we're doing right now. If we had more of that, that would probably be a better thing, I suspect. I don't know that with certainty, but that's my hunch.
But that would also encourage less work.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's what I mean. If it's less work, if you stay home, you're not working, you're not contributing to GDP. Are you working, though, when you're staying home with your kids, or is it all fun and roses and princesses and castles? Or is it real work? It's freaking work, right? That's why other people are willing to do it with daycare. I mean, it's real work, even with your own kids. You love them, but you hate them sometimes too, right? It's real work to kind of stay home with your kids. So the point I really want to emphasize is there's a ton of work that goes on in our nation. That's probably good for human flourishing, for society, for individuals, and for our how we act as a community and as a nation and as a state. There's a ton of things that go on that are very healthy for us and good that don't get captured in GDP. Now, does that mean GDP is bad and we should throw it out? No. It turns out economists have looked at this and placed GDP tends to be pretty well correlated with some of those other good outcomes that we desire, that it's not too bad of a measure. Believe me, economists have studied this ferociously, because if GDP sucks in terms of measuring prosperity and happiness, or whatever you want to call it, of the nation, then we shouldn't be measuring it. Why the hell are we adding it up? Unless it's truly evil or something, and then like, well, we should avoid it. Oh, we want no GDP. You know, let's be subsistence level living and whatever. Well, it turns out there's pretty good information that says GDP is not a bad measure as a proxy for these things that we hold near and dear. Obviously, higher income per person, if you budget, if you take my personal finance class, maybe it would allow you to have one of the spouses stay home and take care of the kids. Right? You don't both have to work if you're in a situation where you're not spending every dollar on things that you don't know where they're going. Okay, but that's not true for everybody, certainly. All right, so income distribution, non-market work, staying home with kids, laundry, dishes, mowing lawn, the list goes on and on and on. All of that stuff is, of course, not included in GDP. Illegal activities. Illegal activities. Prostitution. Is that included in GDP? Is it included in Las Vegas?
Yes.
In certain cases, right? I'm sure there's unreported stuff too that goes on in Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, whatever. But GDP, if it's a real business and it's recognized legally, it's included in GDP. If we say pot is illegal today, but tomorrow Kansas makes pot legal, what happens to GDP? It goes up. Right? All the exchanges that were happening illegally, of course, you get thrown in jail if you file your tax. Well, yeah, I made $20,000 at Freddy's Frozen Custard, but I also made $50,000 selling pot. Well, now all of a sudden, if that's your deal, your $50,000 can be claimed legally, right? So your income, all of that comes above board, and GDP will go up. So illegal activities are unreported, but that drug dealer still has to go buy toilet paper at Walmart too. So we're missing some economic activity. We're missing illegal activities with the measurement of GDP. Yeah.
All cash transactions that go unreported considered illegal activities.
Yes. Yeah. All cash transactions. So the question was, are all cash transactions illegal? Technically, yes. So when what's the rule? Anybody know the rule of how much income somebody has to pay before they have to give you a W-2? $600. So the company, now some people think, because kind of you want to believe what you want to believe, is that, oh, just pay me $500 because then I don't have to claim it on my taxes. If you read the IRS code a little deeper, it's just that the company doesn't have to report it and send you a W-2. If you made $10 mowing your neighbor's lawn, you're supposed to claim it. So the law is that all income is to be claimed. So that's the law. So cash transactions that don't get reported, you are breaking the law. It's done. Now, I'm not going to tell you to quit doing it, but you're going to be breaking the law. We break the law all the time, right? I probably have told most of you, well, some of you had me before, my 9-mile-an-hour rule.
Yeah.
So my 9-mile-an-hour rule is that I never drive more than 9 miles over the speed limit. I've never gotten a ticket in my, let's call it 30 years, how old am I? Yeah, 30 years of driving or whatever, 30 plus years, never got a speeding ticket. So when it's a 30-mile-an-hour zone, I drive 39. When it's a 75-mile-an-hour zone, I drive 84. 9 miles over. What I'm telling you, is this being recorded? Oh crap, it is. I break the law every day I drive my car. So, you know, your choice. You know, we all, wherever you sit, if you don't like my morals, come and see me after class. We'll talk about driving morals or something, but that's the way it is. Okay, so the last thing I want to bring up with GDP is some of the missing work. You guys have heard about the oil spill down in New Orleans area with the offshore drilling and the busted line, and we end up having oil wash up on shore and little birdies with oil all over them, and they got the Dawn dish soap and they're scrubbing their feathers and everything. So, do the cleanup activities of the oil spill increase GDP or decrease it? The cleanup activities, scrubbing the little birdies, oil off their feathers and stuff, cleaning the shorelines that are got, you know, black now. The cleanup activities, do that tend to increase GDP or decrease it? Increase, right? We have to pay people to scrub the little birdie's feathers and to clean the beaches and to do all of that. So the cleanup activities tend to increase GDP. Increased GDP would be a good thing, but is an oil spill a good thing for society? No, right? So environmental stuff where there's actual cleanup after disaster, we could talk hurricanes or other things. Those things are like, oh, GDP's going up. Yeah, we have to rebuild the whole community, 3,000 houses. Woo, thank God, GDP's going up. Are we happy that the hurricane destroyed all 3,000 homes? No, it's awful. People died and, you know, all the awful things with the tragedy. But the cleanup efforts would tend to increase GDP. And so GDP is missing out on that. So don't start packing up, otherwise I might stay later, but we still got time here. So number four, remember I told you I'm really bad at letting out early, so. All right, number four is missing some bad things, or I should say not missing, really, we're including bad things that increase GDP. So example, cleanup efforts after oil spill tend to increase GDP, even though the disaster was bad for the economy / society, if you want to think of it that way.
Would it be bad for the economy or just society?
Well, so let me back up a sec. We're trying to use GDP as a measure of the prosperity of the nation. When GDP goes up, that's good. When GDP goes down, it's bad. That's what we're trying to use the variable for. But in some cases, it doesn't work very well. It's giving us the wrong signal, perhaps. So GDP might be going up because we're having to clean up after an oil spill. The oil spill was actually bad, but the cleanup efforts give us the wrong signal. Does that make sense? That we're kind of using it as a signal to try to figure out if the economy is doing good or bad.
So don't companies get taxed like millions of dollars?
A little louder.
Don't companies get fined like millions of dollars when they have the whole spill? So what does that contribute?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean that's why I put cleanup efforts. So, but that then would go towards possibly the cleanup efforts, right? So it's still helping GDP with that cleanup effort, whether it's funded by taxpayers or whether it's funded by the company through fines or something. That part of it doesn't matter in terms of the cleanup efforts. Okay, we'll call it a day there. If you got some additional questions, come on up and see me.